She signed the divorce papers with a smirk, and 3 months later, she jumped in front of a knife meant for me. I can still see it, the sharp gleam of the blade, the chaos of shattered glass, the sound of her breath catching in her throat as blood bloomed across her white blouse. For a second, time froze. Her eyes locked on mine, calm, almost apologetic, before she fell into my arms. The world around us blurred into noise. Screams. Footsteps. My hands trembling against her fading pulse. She whispered something I could barely hear, "Now you'll finally understand." And just like that, the woman who once destroyed my life died to save it. You want to know how we got here? Let me tell you what it means to love someone powerful enough to destroy you. When people ask how a woman like Elena ended up with a man like me, I still don't have an answer that sounds believable. I was a nobody, a software engineer from a forgotten corner of the city, scraping by on freelance gigs and instant noodles. She was Elena Voss, the kind of name that carried weight when it hit the air. CEO of Voss Dynamics, featured in magazines, her face plastered on billboards with headlines like, "The Woman Who Rewrote the Future of Tech." They called our marriage a strategic union. A merger of intellect and influence. For me, it wasn't a strategy. It was love, simple, raw, and maybe a little naive. When we first met, she didn't smile. Not once. Her voice was sharp, efficient, like a woman too busy conquering the world to entertain small talk. Yet, the first time she looked at me, really looked at me, I saw something flicker behind those cold gray eyes, exhaustion, maybe. Or loneliness she didn't know how to name. Our early days were tense. She wasn't cruel, but she was distant, the kind of distance that makes a room feel colder even when the sun is out. She scheduled dinners like meetings, kissed me goodnight like it was protocol, and kept her phone face down whenever I was near. I remember the first time I made her laugh. We were sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m., eating cheap ramen because her chefs were off for the weekend. I cracked a stupid joke about how billionaires still had to burn their tongues like everyone else. She tried to suppress it, that laugh, but it slipped out anyway. Short. Uncontrolled. Humans. After that, the ice began to crack. She'd linger longer in conversation. Ask about my projects. Let me see her without the armor, hair undone, barefoot, humming softly while reading financial reports. Those were the moments that made me fall deeper, harder, more blindly. I used to think love was built on grand gestures. But with her, it was in the small things. The way she'd reach for my hand in a crowded elevator. The way she'd rest her head on my shoulder while pretending to check emails. The way she said, "Don't let anyone make you feel small, not even me." That line. I replayed it in my head for years. Over time, she became the only person I trusted. I told her everything, things I'd never said aloud before. About growing up in foster homes, about stealing code in college to prove I could outsmart a professor, about the sleepless nights where I felt like a fraud. She'd listen without judgment, without reaction. Just silence. A silence that felt like safety. Once, I asked her what she was thinking when I told her those things. She smiled faintly and said, "It's fascinating how much people give away when they think someone's listening." I laughed then, thought she was being philosophical. I didn't see the warning in her words. Sometimes she'd study me while I talked, eyes sharp like she was memorizing patterns, not emotions. I told myself it was love, that she was trying to understand me. Now, looking back, I realize she wasn't trying to understand. She was cataloging. I remember the night it hit me, not the betrayal, not yet, but the foreshadow of it. We were lying in bed, city lights spilling through the curtains, her back pressed against me. I whispered, "I'm lucky you found me." She turned slightly, voice calm, deliberate, "No. I chose you." At the time, it sounded romantic. Now it sounds like a transaction. She was my secret keeper. My confidant. My entire world. And I was her open book. I thought she was my safe place. Turns out, she was just taking notes. It started small, so small that I almost missed it. At first, it was her tone. The warmth that once softened her voice was gone, replaced by clipped, efficient sentences. She started calling me Elias instead of Eli. The way she used to when we first met, when everything was formal and distant. In public, she became colder. We'd attend company galas together, but she'd drift toward her executives, leaving me standing by the buffet with a champagne glass I didn't want. Once, when a journalist asked about our marriage, she laughed and said, "It's just like running a business, some days you make a profit, some days you take a loss." The room laughed. I didn't. I tried not to read into it. Elena was under pressure, her company was preparing to launch a massive AI partnership. She barely slept. I told myself it was stress, just another cycle in her endless drive for perfection. But then came him. Marcus Hale. Junior executive. Ambitious. Always hanging around Elena's office, eyes sharp and voice dripping with admiration whenever he spoke to her. He was the kind of man who used compliments like currency. At first, I brushed it off. She was his boss, after all. But soon, I noticed things. The way she'd straighten her posture when he entered the room. The low laughter she saved only for him. How she'd end our calls abruptly when his name flashed on her screen. Late nights, I'd wake up to find her side of the bed empty. I'd hear muffled conversations from her home office, her voice low, controlled, the kind of tone she used when negotiating deals or giving orders. One night, I walked in without knocking. She was on a video call. The moment she saw me, she minimized the window too fast. "Who was that?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Work. You wouldn't understand." The way she said it, so casually dismissive, stung more than any insult. A few days later, I overheard her in the hallway, speaking to someone on the phone. My name came up, and I froze. "He won't be a problem. I know how to handle him," she said, her tone clinical, detached. "Not my husband. Not Eli. Just him." That night, I couldn't sleep. My chest felt heavy, like I was sinking into something I couldn't escape. Still, I tried to trust her. I tried to believe this was all in my head. Then I saw the contract. I was at the office late, picking up my forgotten laptop. Her assistant wasn't there, but Elena's office light was on. I hesitated at her door, hearing no sound inside. Curiosity won. On her desk lay a draft agreement with a foreign investment firm. The project title caught my eye, Project Helios. My blood ran cold. Helios was my idea. A neural encryption framework I'd developed years ago, an algorithm designed to protect data from quantum decryption. I'd told Elena about it one night, just us and a bottle of wine, when I still believed sharing my dreams with her meant something. I picked up the document, scanning the lines. My code structure was there, word for word, just rebranded under her company's banner. When she walked in and saw me holding it, she didn't even flinch. "What is this?" I demanded. She adjusted her blazer calmly. "It's business. This is my work. My idea. You stole it." Her expression didn't change. "Correction, you told me about it. Ideas don't belong to people who can't protect them." The air left my lungs. "Elena, that's not just business. That's betrayal." She leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "You're overreacting. You think too emotionally, Eli. That's why you'll never survive in my world." I wanted to shout. To break something. But all I managed was, "You can't separate business and love like that." Her gaze turned icy. "I already have." That night, I walked out. I didn't even know where I was going, I just needed to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by her indifference. For days after, I tried to convince myself it didn't mean what it looked like. Maybe she had a reason. Maybe there was some legal loophole. But when I saw the news headline a week later, Voss Dynamics unveils quantum data security initiative, led by CEO Elena Voss, I knew the truth. She'd used my secret. My creation. My trust. Something inside me cracked open then. I started noticing more inconsistencies, meetings she forgot to tell me about, encrypted emails she'd send late at night, text notifications from TemH that vanished the second they appeared. The distance between us became a canyon. We stopped touching. We stopped talking. The only sound in the apartment was the quiet hum of her laptop, her world running parallel to mine, untouchable. That's when I started my own project, one I never told her about. A folder on my desktop, hidden under layers of encryption. I named it simply, Proof. Inside, I stored screenshots, message logs, metadata, anything I could find that hinted at what she was doing. It wasn't about revenge then, it was about survival. About not going insane in a world where I couldn't tell the truth from manipulation. Every time I added something new, my heart broke a little more. One night, while reviewing one of her encrypted messages, I stumbled upon a quote she'd once told me over dinner months ago. You should never trust someone who knows your weaknesses. Back then, she'd said it like advice. Now, it felt like a confession. I stared at that line on the screen for hours, realizing how blind I'd been. The woman I loved didn't just know my weaknesses. She built an empire on them. And for the first time since we'd met, I stopped trying to fix us. I started preparing for the storm I could feel coming. It happened faster than I ever thought possible. One moment, I was her husband, her confidant, the next, I was a liability. The first sign came through a news notification that popped up while I was grabbing coffee. Voss Dynamics secures record investment after launch of Project Helios. I froze mid-sip. My heart thudded hard against my ribs as I scrolled down the article. There it was, in bold print, my code, my design, my life's work, presented as the innovation of her company. Except it wasn't just her company. It was her, specifically. Elena Voss, CEO and lead developer of Helios quantum encryption technology. Lead developer. My breath hitched. My hands went cold. She hadn't just taken credit, she'd rewritten the narrative entirely, turned me from creator into footnote, from partner into shadow. The article even quoted her. Innovation requires sacrifice. Trust me, I've learned that firsthand. I nearly threw my phone across the street. By the time I got home that night, I was shaking, not just with anger, but disbelief. I told myself there had to be some mistake, some oversight her PR team made without her approval. That's how deep my denial ran. But then I found the legal filings. They were right there, stored in our shared home server, a place she never thought I'd check. My name had been scrubbed from the patent registration. The source ownership documents had been corrected to list Voss Dynamics as the sole proprietor. And there it was, her digital signature. Elena's. I felt something inside me snap, a soundless, irreversible break. When she came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, the documents pulled up on the big screen. She looked tired but composed, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Elena, I said, my voice tight. What is this? She looked up, saw the screen, and stopped mid-step. Her eyes flickered, just once, before she straightened. It's exactly what it looks like. My code. My framework. You filed it as yours. I filed it under Voss Dynamics, she corrected, her tone maddeningly calm. I took a step closer. You used me. Her lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. You offered yourself. I just accepted the gift. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. My throat burned with words that wouldn't form. All I could manage was, why? She looked at me like the question was naive. Because you would have given it away for free. You don't understand leverage, Elias. You never did. You create because you need to. I create because I know how to make it matter. That's not creation, I said through clenched teeth. That's theft. She tilted her head. Is it theft if the door was open and the lights were on? I wanted to scream, to break something, but she just kept talking, measured, surgical. I told you once, she said, never to trust someone who knows your weaknesses. You insisted on trusting me anyway. That's not betrayal, Eli. That's inevitable. Her words carved through me like glass. You're a monster, I whispered. She gave a soft laugh. No, I'm a realist. You were the dreamer. Every empire needs one of each. I stormed out before I did something I'd regret. But the damage was already done. Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart. It started with an internal investigation at my consulting firm. I was called in by my manager, who looked uncomfortable, almost sympathetic. Eli, he said, there's talk that you leaked proprietary data from Voss Dynamics. Her legal team filed a complaint. We have to suspend you until this clears. I remember staring at him, numb. She accused me of leaking. He sighed. Look, I'm not saying I believe it, but the board can't risk association. You understand. I didn't. I still don't. Within days, the story hit the tech press. Ex-consultant linked to Voss data breach scandal. My inbox is filled with messages from people I once called friends, most of them asking for distance, some not even bothering to pretend it was anything else. The few who stayed silent hurt the most. I tried to fight back, to clear my name, but every move I made was countered by her legal team. They were precise, relentless, efficient, like she'd planned this months in advance. Maybe she had. While I drowned in public humiliation, her company's stock surged. Investors called her a visionary. Her speeches were broadcast everywhere, her voice calm, controlled, brilliant. I watched every one of them. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to see if there was still a trace of the woman I loved behind those perfect words. There wasn't. I hit rock bottom the day I found out she'd filed for divorce. The documents arrived in a clean white envelope, hand-delivered by a firm assistant who wouldn't meet my eyes. Irreconcilable differences, I read aloud, my voice hollow. That's what we're calling it now. At the back of the packet was a single handwritten note from her. Secrets have consequences. That line haunted me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. It wasn't a taunt. It was a warning. And I didn't understand it yet. After the divorce, the rest unraveled fast. My accounts were frozen under, pending legal review. My name was on a corporate blacklist that no one would admit existed. My emails went unanswered, my applications ignored. I sold my car, then my apartment. Moved into a one-room flat overlooking a construction site. The only thing that kept me tethered was that folder, proof. Every time I opened it, I saw her face on magazine covers, smiling. The perfect CEO. The icon of success. The woman who had gutted me so cleanly I didn't even notice I was bleeding until it was too late. I used to replay our last conversation in my head. Her voice, calm, detached, you offered yourself. I just accepted the gift. I wonder if she ever regretted saying it. Sometimes, I'd catch myself whispering her name, just to remember what it felt like to say it softly instead of with hate. Other times, I'd stare at my reflection, barely recognizing the man she left behind, a ghost in cheap clothes, clutching fragments of a life that used to matter. That was rock bottom. No money. No reputation. No love. Just a man who'd handed over his soul in exchange for affection, and learned too late that the woman he trusted most had filed it away as intellectual property. But rock bottom has one advantage. It gives you a foundation. And I was about to build something new, something colder. Because if Elena Voss thought she could end me, she forgot one thing. She didn't just take my secrets. She taught me hers. Months passed like a slow, deliberate wound. I did not disappear. I retreated. I withdrew to the parts of myself she thought she'd erased. The parts that never needed applause. The parts she had once called useful, in the abstract. I learned to move without leaving a trail. To sleep in daylight and work through the night. To speak in false names. To make small purchases with cash. To live like a ghost with a purpose. I changed my name, not on paper, never on paper, and I changed the cadence of my life. The man who answered to Elias Voss was dead. In his place was someone sharper, quieter, less easily wounded. I kept my eyes soft in public, precise in private. The world saw a thinner version of me. The man inside was building something. I found a tiny apartment above a laundromat. The hum of machines kept me company. I wired a makeshift lab in the closet. Old servers I'd salvaged, hardware scavenged from auctions, software I rewrote from memory. Everything I'd ever used to build safety nets for other people became tools for one purpose, to find the places where she hid her rot. People think I got good because I practiced. I did practice. But the truth is uglier and simpler. I got methodical because I had to. Grief sharpened into hunger. Betrayal hardened into discipline. At first, I hunted for the obvious things: contracts, filings, transfer records. I dug through public records with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose. I found shell companies. A paper trail leading through 3 countries. Enough smoke to justify more digging. Then I began to pry open the softer, slipperier secrets, the ones not on paper but held in servers, in machine logs, in user behavior analytics. Those are the places CEOs forget to lock. They're too busy polishing speeches to check the back door. I dusted for digital fingerprints. I rewired the tokens. I mapped people who spoke to her at odd hours. I traced data flows from her private cloud to servers in jurisdictions where oversight is a suggestion, not a law. It took months. It took patience and the kind of moral flexibility that feels like a necessity when you're trying to survive an injustice. What I found surprised me. And it scared me. There were tax maneuvers that bent the law, not just bending, but folding it into origami. There were accounts that paid for things that had nothing to do with product development. There was an off-the-books AI program, Astra, built not to protect customers but to predict them. It scanned employee emails, monitored boardroom chatter, collected private data on partners and investors to manipulate decisions before they were even made. I watched, stunned, as threads emerged. Astra wasn't an experiment. It was a weapon. It harvested weak points. It built profiles of people's fears and used them to influence votes, to sway deals, to ensure loyalty through quiet blackmail and the artful nudging of career paths. And then there was insider trading. A pattern of trades that lined up with executive memos. Enough profit to buy influence. Enough culture to buy silence. I collected everything. Not because I wanted to expose her to the world for spectacle. Not because I wanted to watch her burn for the crowd. I collected it because I remembered her hands on my shoulders. Because I still heard the softness in her voice before betrayal. Because I needed the truth to feel less like a hallucination and more like evidence. At night, I dreamed of the woman who once hummed while reading reports. I woke up with her shape pressed against my chest in memory. Those dreams were an ache. They undermined the man I was trying to become. They made me question the point of all this work. Did she ever love me? I asked myself that until my thoughts went raw. There were moments, small, unguarded, where her expression softened in ways a strategist rarely allowed. There were nights when her head rested on my shoulder without calculation. Did any of it mean anything? Or was she always practicing intimacy the way she practiced negotiations, carefully, with the endgame fixed in her mind? Doubt is a subtle saboteur. It crept in and tried to convince me that my coldness would make me like her. That revenge would hollow me out until I matched her. I let it in sometimes, then I slammed it out. I reminded myself that feeling doubt didn't mean I'd fail, only that I was human. And that human part of me was what the plan needed. Precision requires heart as much as it requires steel. There was a blueprint forming in my head. It had 3 clear phases. Phase 1, expose. Leak small pieces of her empire's skeleton to the right people. Journalists with reputations for meticulous investigations. Regulators with teeth. Investors who valued reputation over profit. Not everything at once. A drip feed. Enough to interest them, not enough to spark a frenzy. Phase 2, fracture. Use those leaks to seed suspicion within her circle. Poke at confidence. Quietly share the right files with board members. Let paranoia bloom in the executive suite. People fracture when they feel their reputations are on the line. People who once protected her for status will turn if they fear exposure more than loyalty. Phase 3, collapse. Time it for a moment of vulnerability, an annual shareholders meeting, a high-stakes press conference, a date when all the most important decision-makers would be assembled. Drop the evidence publicly, legally, and with a lawyer on standby. Let the world watch as the empire she built with wit and cruelty dismantles itself. I wrote the plan down in a notebook. Bullet points. Timelines. Deadlines. Each item was a promise. Each promise is a step away from being the man she'd left in ruin. There were setbacks, small, terrifying, necessary. Once, a security analyst from Voss Dynamics pinged my network. An automated alert that someone had been probing their cloud. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. My heartbeat turned into a drum the room couldn't ignore. I scrambled. I rerouted through proxies in 3 different time zones. I faked a phantom user with an alibi in Bali. I wiped logs, sowed false leads into the trail. For a beat, I felt naked. For a beat, I thought I'd been careless enough to get caught. They traced it to a coffee shop downtown. I almost laughed at the absurdity, the analyst imagining a laptop and a man in a hoodie. I had been sloppy, but not stupid. Not yet. 2 nights later, there was a knock. Not at my door, but at the laundry room's back entrance. I'd learned not to assume it was the city. They closed the laundromat for a minute, then reopened. She was there, standing under the sodium light, hands in her coat pockets. Her hair was loose. She looked exactly like someone who'd never been damaged, composed, precise, dangerous. "You shouldn't be here," I said. My voice didn't betray the calculation she'd just shattered. She smiled, small and strange. "You're good, Eli. You're better than I expected. You followed me. I wanted to see a man who could obsess like that," she said. Her eyes were disarmingly tender. We were never just 2 people in a marriage. There was always a strategy. You pretended there wasn't. You used me. "No," she corrected softly. "You used yourself. You gave me everything. I merely arranged it." Her presence made me dizzy. The old tenderness I'd carried for years rose like a tide. For an instant I almost forgot what I'd come to do. "You think revenge will make you free?" she asked, quietly, as if we were back on the sofa, trading thoughts about the future. She sounded almost compassionate. Her voice found the softness I loved. It made something inside me unclench and bleed. I looked at her. I felt my plans teeter. I thought about how she once rested her head on my shoulder. I thought about the stitched-up cost records, the server logs, the invoices. I thought of the way she'd smiled while filing away my work as hers. "Freedom doesn't interest me," I said. The sentence came out harsher than I meant. It was a confession, not a declaration. Justice does. She studied me the way someone studies an experiment. Then you've already lost it. The words landed like a verdict. She left without another backward glance. I rewound that visit a dozen times in my head. She'd come close enough to see me. Close enough to test my seam. Close enough to plant a seed of doubt. Maybe she wanted to pull me back. Maybe she wanted to know how far I would go. Maybe she wanted to remind me she could. Whatever her reason, I held to the plan. I tightened security. I moved servers. I created false personas to feed information. I cultivated contacts, hard, careful friendships with reporters and a retired prosecutor who smelled trouble like a bloodhound. I learned how to leak without being the leak. There were nights when I would open our old messages and read her sign-off, "Don't let anyone make you feel small, not even me." The cruelty of that sentence grew on me. I realized then that she'd always been teaching me. Teaching me how to be seen and overlooked at the same time. When the day of the shareholders' meeting approached, everything felt taut. The evidence was assembled. The channels were set. The people who needed to know were already planted with curiosity. My hands no longer trembled the way they used to. They moved with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed the fall and learned how to land on his feet. Elena would be on stage. Investors. Journalists. Board members who thought themselves untouchable. The world is watching. I imagined the way her jaw would set, the practiced smile. I imagined her reading a teleprompter while the ground shifted under her feet. I also imagined something else, her stepping without thinking into the chaos. The thought felt like a crack in the armor I'd built. It was a fear I wasn't ready to name. But whatever came next, I was committed. I'd spent months sculpting a path that led straight to her throne. I'd traded sleep, comfort, everything for a moment of truth. And now, with the stage set, I was ready to pull the curtain. The auditorium smelled like nerves and expensive cologne. Lights like suns hung above the stage, blinding and indifferent. Cameras focused, lenses hungry. The entire board sat in a row of stiff chairs, polished faces, perfect suits. Elena stood at the podium, calm as a weather report, the teleprompter's glow painting her cheekbones pale. My hands didn't shake. I'd rehearsed this moment in 30 different states of panic and clarity, the rehearsed version had steadier hands. I told myself that steadiness was enough. Elena Voss will now address shareholders, the moderator announced. The room hushed, a held breath spread through the crowd. She smiled the smile she used for the press, precise, disarming. "Thank you. Today we celebrate innovation." Her voice filled the hall, confident, luminous. I felt the phone in my jacket like a fuse. The back-end script I'd written sat quietly, patiently, waiting for my single touch. Months of graft and ghosts and stolen nights all funneled into this one line of code: execute, distribute, expose. My thumb pressed the glass. It began as a trickle. An anonymous email to a journalist. A secured drop to a regulator. A private torrent to a few analysts. My dump flowed through channels I'd cultivated, paths that didn't point back to me. The files unfurled across encrypted networks and into public view. At first the murmurs were small, tabletop whispers, but they swelled fast. Someone in the front row flinched. A reporter's fingers flew across a keyboard. On the main screen behind Elena, a headline flashed: Internal Voss Dynamics files leak, allegations of illicit AI program and financial misconduct. She didn't miss a beat. The smile dropped for a fraction of a second, just a flash, and then she was a conductor waving her hand through the storm. "We're aware of certain allegations, blah blah, internal review, transparency." The room erupted. Questions exploded into the microphone like gunfire. Board members leaned toward each other, faces draining. Cameras pivoted, live feeds chopping into my living room, into devices worldwide. The files I'd dropped were surgical in their cruelty, server manifests showing Astra's profiling logs, transactions tied to offshore accounts, email threads where executives joked about nudging investor votes with targeted leaks. I watched her watch the screen. For a moment, there was no Elena, only a portrait of someone exposed by her own shadow. Someone in the audience shouted, "You're under investigation." A man stood and read a leaked memo aloud, his voice trembling with the satisfaction of discovery. Her chief legal counsel fired off a prepared statement. The board's chair whispered into his ear, then stood, face paper-struck. I could see the seconds ticking like a bomb on his forehead. They began to distance themselves, the way people do when a tide turns. That should have been the end of it for me. The fall I'd dreamed of had begun. Investors called in. Phones rang. The live stream's comments scrolled like a fever. Elena's voice became background noise as the room filled with the sound of empire cracking. Then the room shifted tone. Somewhere in the frenzy, someone recognized that we were both dangerous. A man in the third row rose suddenly, pushing past a flurry of chairs. He moved with a trained purpose, short, efficient steps. The crowd gasped. I saw him reach into his coat. A glint, metal, caught the light. Adrenaline is a clean, honest thing. It clarifies and slurs at once. My body reacted before my mind could protest. People screamed. Security swarmed. The man lunged, not at Elena, not at the podium, but straight at me. He knew where I was. He moved like someone who'd been paid to kill quietly. The world condensed to a single, impossible slow motion, a hand flashing, the edge of a blade, the sick metallic smell that comes before blood. He aimed for my chest. The strike was precise, meant to end whatever I represented. She moved. There was no thinking, only motion. Elena's body, so composed seconds before, shifted like a trained animal. She stepped between us, the blade catching her shoulder, then slicing a clean, hot line across her torso. The auditorium's bright lights turned red. For a second, I didn't understand what was happening. Then I understood everything. She fell into me like an answer I'd waited too long for. My hands found the wound by instinct, tearing at fabric, pressing palm to flesh. It came away warm and sticky. "Eli," she whispered. Her voice was small in a way I'd loved and hated. "You have to stop." Her words were cut with a wet, desperate sound. Blood filled the space between us like a second language. Around us, all the rehearsed indifference collapsed into raw chaos. Security tackled the attacker, other men in plain suits moved to intercept two more figures I hadn't seen until then, clean, efficient professionals who had clearly been planning a different ending. They were hired to silence the spectacle, to snuff the sparks before they turned into flame. Someone had paid for quiet. I had never imagined she would protect me. Not like this. Not with her body between death and me. Why? I asked, stupidly, because the world had narrowed to the beat of her heart under my palm. Her fingers, so cold, found mine. She smiled, small and crooked, as if surprised by a memory. "I knew all your secrets," she said, voice a frayed ribbon. "I just never told you mine." Her eyes brushed mine, not the calculating gaze that had catalogued and measured, but something older, private. "They were going to take you. Not just your work, everything. They wanted Helios as a weapon. If you stayed visible, Elliot, they'd have used you to justify it. They would have made you complicit, or worse." She coughed, blood left a sheen on her lip. I thought if I made you disappear, publicly, if I burned you out, no one would look for you. It was the only way to keep you off the ledger." Her breath hitched. "It was ugly. I was ugly. I thought I could control the narrative." She laughed once, brittle, surprised. "I never imagined they'd turn on me." My hands trembled. "You framed me." "I framed you," she admitted. But not to destroy you. To bury you where they couldn't touch you. The investor, Blackwell, needed a scapegoat. If Eli Voss was ruined, they'd have no reason to recruit him. They'd move on. It was supposed to be temporary. Her eyes grew distant. I'm sorry. The word was tiny, and it cost more than anything she'd ever done. I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to scream everything I'd wanted and needed to say for 3 years into her ear. But the sentence that came out was a long, wordless animal noise, half sob, half rage. Stay with me, I said. Please, stay with me. She smiled at that, as if my plea amused her. You always thought you could fix people, she murmured. Maybe you can't fix me. Maybe you can fix what I did. Her hand tightened around mine for a moment, warm, familiar, then slackened as the pulse slowed. Sirens were approaching, a thin keening that meant the world would now be involved. Flashbulbs turned the room into a heartbeat of white. The attacker was in cuffs. The hired men were subdued. My phone lit the screen with endless notifications, breaking news, live feeds, a dozen versions of our faces side by side. I pressed my forehead to her. Her blood painted my palm. Her breath came shallow, then shallower. I thought, she tried. I thought I could keep both of us alive. You could have told me, I said, voice breaking. You could have trusted me with the plan. Her eyes fluttered. Trust is expensive, she whispered. You told me your secrets like a child shows a cat a hole. You trusted people because you wanted to be seen. I didn't have that luxury. She hiccuped, and a small amount of blood spattered my chin. Outside, the world shouted. Inside, time folded. She leaned into me the way she used to on quiet nights, when she let herself be small for a moment. For a moment, the woman who'd single-handedly destroyed me was just the woman whose hair smelled like rain and ink. I'm sorry, she said again, then, with a steadier hand than I'd expected at the end, she added, live, Eli. Don't let them finish this for you. Her eyes closed. Her fingers slipped from mine. I kept talking though she couldn't hear me. I pressed harder. I begged, pleaded, raged. I wanted the world to rewind, to undo the signatures, the filings, the evenings of cold shoulders and warmer betrayals. I wanted to trade my life for hers without counting the cost. But she was gone. They cut her loose and took her under a blanket for the paramedics to find. The cameras roared, catching every angle, every tragic tableau. People yelled. The chairman's face was ashen. Board members were calling lawyers. Investors were whispering into phones. The files I'd dumped spread like a virus, spawning thick pieces and legal threats and demands for resignations. I sat on the stage with her weight gone and felt the echo of what I'd done and what she'd done hanging heavy in the room. She had saved me with a blade meant to end me. She had confessed with blood on her lips that she'd framed me to bury me so the real predator wouldn't take what was theirs. I thought then, in the thicket of sirens and camera flashes and the metallic smell of panic, that I understood the worst and the most complicated fact about love: it can be both fraud and salvation at once. It rained for 3 days straight after the conference. Maybe the city was trying to wash away what happened, or maybe it was mocking the attempt. Everywhere I turned, screens were filled with her face. Disgraced CEO under investigation. Voss Dynamics collapses amid scandal. Hero or villain? The enigma of Elena Voss. The headlines didn't agree on what she was. But they all agreed on what she left behind: ruin. The police came first, swarming the hall with sirens and flashlights. I remember their hands pulling me away from her body, their voices muffled through shock. My palms were still slick with her blood when they cuffed the attacker. They said he'd been hired by an unnamed offshore fund, one of her own investors. The same ones who had funded Helios, the same ones she tried to protect me from. Then came the journalists, vultures with microphones. They wanted quotes, soundbites, a confession from the man she had once destroyed and who now held her dying body in his arms. I gave them nothing. There was nothing left to give. In the following weeks, everything she built turned to ash. Her board resigned, her assets froze, and her empire crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. But my name, was finally cleared. An independent investigation exposed the falsified leaks, the planted evidence, the manipulation. Every smear she'd orchestrated was undone by the truth she left behind. The story that broke the internet wasn't CEO exposed. It was CEO's final act, sacrifice or redemption. Some said she died a villain trying to rewrite her legacy. Others said she died a woman trying to save the only man she'd ever loved. I didn't care which version they chose. Both were true. I remember standing in the rain the day of her funeral. No cameras this time. No microphones. Just the cold hum of a world that moved on too quickly. The grave was simple, no company logo, no marble sculpture, just her name, clean and exact. Elena Voss, 1987 to 2024. There were no mourners, not really. Her board didn't show. Her investors were silent. The people who had once worshipped her power now pretended they'd never known her at all. I stood alone, drenched, watching the rain pool on the fresh earth. She destroyed me to save me, I whispered. My voice cracked against the wind. And in the end, she died to prove it. For a long time, I thought revenge was the answer. I thought breaking her world would make me whole again. But standing there, hands trembling, soaked to the bone, I realized something colder, truer. I hadn't wanted her destroyed. I'd wanted her to understand what she'd done. And she did, in the only way someone like her ever could. Her last act wasn't redemption. It was confession, written not in ink or code, but in blood. I closed my eyes and saw her again, smiling faintly in that half-light between hate and love. The way she said my name. The way she looked at me when she took that blade meant for me. People think betrayal kills love. They're wrong. Love doesn't die with betrayal. It mutates. It causes grief. It becomes guilt. It becomes something that eats you quietly from the inside until you mistake it for silence. As the rain thickened, I placed a hand on the headstone and felt the chill seep through my skin. I used to think revenge was the end of love, I said softly. Now I know, it's just another form of it. Then I turned, walked away, and let the rain erase my footsteps before anyone could follow them.